what's up? What's up? What's up? Hey, what's up? This is a podcast called Everything's Relative. I'm Eve Sturges. I do the hosting. I try to be creative with my intros and my outros. Sometimes I get a little desperate. Sorry about that. Thanks for hanging in there. I want to talk about the way that people experience DNA discoveries, which is to say that I want to talk with people who get the most shocking of all the kinds of surprises when they find out that one or more of their biological parent is not their parent at all. If you think about it, the truth of misattributed parentage has existed since the beginning of time, but now we're facing this interesting moment in history because DNA testing is widely available, and as everybody probably knows, it's advertised as a recreational activity, and shit is hitting the fan. This podcast is all about that shit, the shit that hits the fan. Whatever you're doing right now, can you do me a favor? Text a friend about this podcast, send them a link. If you don't have any friends, go over and give me a quick star rating on whatever listening platform you're using. And by the way, everyone who has taken the time to do this so far, thank you so much. It is really, really important for podcasts to stay alive with ratings and reviews. If you think that someone else is doing it so you don't have to, don't think that. Don't be that guy. Just go over and throw me some stars or a sentence as simple as, I listened to this podcast. Super easy. Easy peasy, as the kids say. Anyway, back to this week. I am unsure about when I knew that Kate Jackson and I were kindred spirits, and spending time with her for this episode really confirmed it for me. We connected truly for the first time in 2020 when I spoke with her on the phone for my emergency episode called Emergency Episode, Dr. Laura is the Worst. And since then, we crossed paths again and again in the NPE world through different avenues. And I use her magazine, Severance Magazine. I love reading it. I use it when I'm working as a therapist to people who have had DNA discoveries, and I have it listed on my website as a DNA resource. So of course it made sense for us to get together. I don't know why it took so long for us to get scheduled for a podcast. And unsurprisingly, it was a wonderful time. BK's story touched me in so many different ways. She speaks of everything with, I love the way she talks. She speaks of everything with this like practicality. But underneath, she's revealing such touching vulnerabilities, and it really left me thinking about her family and the secrets people, especially women, keep for a really long time, keep for their whole lives. Give it a listen and let me know what you think. So you're here with me today, and I was thinking back, and I assumed, or am assuming, that you qualify or classify yourself as an NPE, and I actually don't know if that's true. Is that your?
Yeah, it is true. Sort of. I mean, I am. There isn't exactly a word for what I am, but part of it is definitely that I'm an NPE. It's a little bigger than that, I guess, and sort of quasi-adoptee, but not really. I don't like to use that label because it's taking on something that's not quite, but I've never known either of my genetic parents. So whatever that makes me, I don't know.
Okay. And when did you always know that you didn't know who your genetic parents were?
I knew, I learned about 6 years ago that the man who raised me was not my father. I have always never known my mother. She left when I was 9 months old. Oh. And so I know very well, having a mystery parent isn't anything new to me. It's just new circumstances. I never knew what happened to her. She left and sort of, that was it. So I never knew what became of her until maybe 12 or 13 years ago. That whole time, no idea. Didn't know she was alive, didn't know anything. And I was looking for something else completely different on the Social Security debt. It was a complete accident. My husband was talking about someone we knew a million years ago, and he said, I think she died. And I said, well, I can find that out. I just got to go to the death index. And when I got there, and she had in fact died, And it was weird because I ran downstairs shortly after screaming, gaily, I found him, and it was kind of an unseemly thing to say, yeah,
Right,
old
right.
man's dead. But I discovered my mother in the Social Security death index and realized that she had died just a few years before that. And of course, as soon as I saw that, with shaking hands, I went Googling and I found an obituary. And it was under a paywall, and I couldn't get my credit card out of the wallet, so my hands were shaking so much.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But I finally did, and when I did, it said that she was survived by 6 children. And I was stunned because of all the things that I imagined, I never imagined that. Not once.
Whoa.
Not once. Never occurred to me. I have an older brother. When this is really hard to condense this story, but when my mother was 17, she had an affair with a married man, had a son, my older brother. When she met my dad about a year and a half later, he took my brother in, and she left all of us. So she left this child that she had actually sort of raised, and she left me, who was sort of a blob of nothing at that point. And she took us, when I was 6 months old, she took us away. She took us to Florida and said, whatever the early equivalent of I need space is. And she 3 months later called my dad and said, come and get him. I can't do this. And so he did. And then he filed for divorce. And a few months later, she came. She was in Florida. We were in Philadelphia. She came up. I guess she had to sign the divorce papers. And they ended up getting back together briefly, very briefly. And sometime later, she called him and said she was pregnant and she wanted to put the baby up for adoption, and would he sign the papers? So he was, kind of poor, and he's raising these 2 kids and by himself, and he couldn't take on anymore. And he figured it was probably his kid, and he signed the papers apparently. And so I grew up knowing that I didn't know my mother, and at some point, much later, I knew there was this child out there. And so I searched and searched and searched, but this was pre-internet, and there was not a whole lot I could do. So until I found this obituary about my mother, that was all I knew. And then suddenly there were all these kids, brothers and sisters. So it's a little crazy.
So were you and your older brother included in that 6?
Oh no.
Right, because they wouldn't have known about you. Right.
We were skeletons in the closet. Yeah. They had a couple hints along the way, but they didn't know about us. And I did that thing that I guess a lot of us do when I found this information was, should I, shouldn't I? Do I have a right to upset them? Is this something I could do? And it took, I don't know, not much time before I decided I did. But I couldn't find much about them. They were all really kind of under the radar. And I finally found an email address for the oldest of them. And I chose wisely, as it turns out. And I sent an email, and I didn't get an answer. And I thought, that's it. She didn't want anything to do with me. The whole rejection spiel that we do. And then I don't know. I thought a couple of days went by, and I thought, well, email addresses, they don't always land, and it could be a wrong address. So I put together this whole package. I had some pictures of my mother from when she was young, and I wrote a new letter, and I sent them, and I said, I won't bother you if you don't respond. And we live in the woods in the middle of nowhere, and we have to sometimes do errands that take us through 3 states and take all day.
Sure.
So on the day that I knew that she was going to get this FedEx package that I sent, we were doing that, and I came home and immediately checked the email. There was nothing, and I thought, that's it. That's the end of the story. And like 2 seconds later, I hear ding, and it was her. And her message was so funny because it started out. She said something like, "I hope you're not scamming me because I'm still very raw about my mother's death. But if you're not, are there any more of you? And I'd like to know you."
This is a scam. I'm really mad, but if it's not, I'm really interested.
Yeah, it was just like it was the warmest thing, and they're all like that. But she and I are the most connected. But we were both really bashful, and I couldn't imagine doing this now. But for 3 months, we just emailed. We never called. We never spoke. We just kind of furiously email. It's kind of like a romance you're doing, that thing.
Yeah,
where, you're trying to find out about each other. And then she sent a message one day, and she said, "If it's not too soon, I'd like to come and visit you." I was like, "No, it's not too soon at all." And she flew up, and it was great.
She was in Florida.
She was in Florida.
They had grown up in Florida.
Yeah. And I had sort of known that was probably where my mother was. And most of my brothers and sisters lived down there. And shortly after, while we were still in the emailing stages before we met, she sent me a message, and she said, "I've invited all my sisters. I'm going to treat them to a cruise. And now that you're a sister, I'm inviting you."
Mm.
So that September, I went down to Florida and we went on a cruise. Just the two. They're three sisters. One has since died. So,
Mm.
and after that, I met most of the others at a barbecue one of them threw, and they're great. I mean, they've just been like tender-hearted, warm, open, incredibly loving people. And of course, I upset their apple carts by kind of letting them know that their mother wasn't the person that they
Mhm.
thought she was. Especially my older sister, she was very, very close to my mother, and it was really hard for her to know that such a big secret had been kept from her.
Yeah. Wow.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and what's worse than that is well, we would start to get together every year for family reunions. The first year I invited all of them and their sisters. We found a cabin in the mountains in North Carolina, and we gather, and it was great. My older brother, even, which who I'd been out of touch with for some time, we got him there. And of course, we talk about my mother and how bizarre she was, and
Mhm.
speculate about all her behaviors. And one of my sisters-in-law would would bring up the fact that the six of them don't look much alike. And I don't think that's terribly unusual. I mean, a lot of people don't. I look
Right.
like one or two of them, maybe. So I didn't think much of it. But every time we got together, she'd bring it up.
Mhm.
And she and her husband and daughter came up for Christmas one year, 6 years ago, and she brought it up again. And this time I just could not get it out of my head. And I kept thinking about it. I thought, nah, it's not possible. And I asked my husband, do I look like my dad? Which I knew I didn't. No. Are you like him? He was laughing at me like I couldn't possibly be more different from my dad.
Mhm.
So my dad had previously offered to do a DNA test to help find that sister that had been given up for adoption. So I thought, why not? I'll ask him. He's 90
Mm.
years old at that point. We did the test, and I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. There's no way he's not my father. But some weird part of me was excited and kind of hoped he wasn't. And I know that sounds very strange. And I can't explain it. And that was kind of like a devil angel thing. And it's like, he isn't. No. And when the results came in, he's um, his first cousin is the first person on his list, and I'm not there.
Mhm.
And he is. I had already done a year ago. I had done a DNA test. I had already done it, and foolishly I hadn't looked at it very carefully. But so he is 100% European Jewish Ashkenazi, and
Mhm.
I'm 0%. I am, in fact, Italian and Sicilian.
Mhm.
So I kind of went back to my results, and the reason I didn't think much about it was that my cousin, the one who was second on his match list, had once told me that his family were Sephardic Jews, not Ashkenazi Jews. And so I thought, Italian Sephardic, that makes sense. Did I mention that one of the sisters, oh geez, um, the one who started all that was his sister-in-law, and her theory was that a whole bunch of the other kids were not, didn't have the same fathers. The sister that I very first got in touch with,
Mhm.
as it turns out, when I discovered this, I also discovered that her father wasn't who she thought it would be, who she thought he
No.
was. Yeah.
No,
And
but I
he
wondered
would,
if that's where you were going with the story
yeah,
originally. I was
yeah.
watching it today, and when you said,
Sadly,
yeah, when you
sadly it
said
was.
one sister kept saying that none of us looked alike, I was like,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't the one who started it. And she could not have even begun to suspect that. I don't think it ever crossed her mind, even when she knew I was suddenly going, I wonder about my dad. I'm sure she wasn't wondering about her dad.
right.
And that was well, it's terrible for a number of reasons, but one is that when I sort of showed up in her life, in a way I took her mother away from her, because I made her realize that her mother wasn't quite the person that she thought she was, that she had this whole
Mm.
secret life. And that was
Hmm.
really difficult for her. They were very close. And it was hard to confront that for her. And so then, after kind of, getting through that, now I was suddenly turning around and saying, hey, guess what? On top of that, your dad's not your dad.
Oh my God.
But she's a much
Mhm.
more even-tempered person than I am, and she took it quite well, and she wasn't really freaked out by it at all. Um,
Wow.
and maybe she came to expect surprises after all that we'd kind of gone through. So yeah, that was hard. That was difficult, but I did. The least I could do was try to find her father.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it seemed like a small thing. So after all that happened, I was looking for my brother's father, the brother that I grew up with, and my sister's father, and my own father. And that was sort of an 18-month trip through hell. Um,
Wow. Yeah.
Because at that point, I didn't know anything actually about genetic genealogy up until
Mm-hmm.
that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I became quite obsessive about it. And I don't think for those 18 months I did much of anything else except eat and drink more than I should have. Um, and I just was obsessive about it. And theirs were not so difficult. My brother's was quite easy because I had a hunch about the name. And my sister's didn't take too long, but mine took the full 18 months.
Wow.
I guess because I was dealing with another country, whereas theirs were both pretty much American, well, American and
Oh.
Irish. So theirs
Oh.
were easier. And mine was, my ancestry was Italian.
Oh.
Um, so I grew up thinking I was a child of, well, on my mother's side, English, but on my father's side, I thought I was descending from Russian Jews, Ashkenazi
Right.
Jews.
Right. Because he was 100%, right?
Yeah, 100%. And so I was suddenly Sicilian,
Hmm.
which is pretty wild.
Mm-hmm. That's a left turn.
That's a that's a definite left turn. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of made a lot of sense. And once once I was able to identify the man who was my biological father, who had been dead for some 20 years, it was no longer difficult. But had I
Mm-hmm.
not been able to figure that out, I think I would still feel quite as crazed as I did then.
Right. Do you at the time, did you feel like the obsession was because solving the mystery was interesting step by step, or because you really felt um
No, I had
a need to find out who it was?
a
Uh-huh.
definite need. I have never been someone who loves puzzles. Like the current,
Mhm.
obsession with Wordle is just
Uh-huh.
mystifies me. I just, if I
Yep.
see another one of those things, I might
Kill me.
scream.
Yep.
Oh yeah, I'm just not, you know, I learned doing my ancestry that my family were big on puzzles, and I'm just not. I didn't get those genes. But the puzzle of genealogy was absolutely fascinating to me. Not just my own, but if I'd help other people find their families, putting
Mm.
those pieces together was fascinating. So yeah, it was interesting, but that wasn't it. It was a drive to I just couldn't imagine. And because as I said, I grew up without a mother, and I knew my whole life this longing to know who was my parent, and it was just too
Mhm.
much for me to have that happen again and
Yeah.
not be able to figure it out. So I just had to know.
Yeah.
So, I really feel for the people who never are able to figure it out. I just don't know how you live with that.
Have you connected at all with your paternal side of the family?
Yes, yes, I
Oh.
did. I met fairly quickly. I discovered when I figured out who my father was that there was a son
Uh-huh.
who has not had the least bit of interest in being in touch with me. Um, but
Mhm.
I discovered cousins, and I wrote to them. I wrote first. Well, one of my DNA matches was to my father's mother's side, and I connected with them that way, and they were great and accepting and wonderful and lovely. And then I found cousins on the other side, and um, I sent a letter, and one of the cousins was like 80 years old or something, and she was
Mm.
kind of amused by it, but I don't know that she would have called me, but her daughter persuaded her to call me. And so they told me a little bit. I still haven't learned a whole lot about him, but they were super kind. They invited me down to New Jersey to meet them,
Oh.
and they sent me photographs, which was the best thing in the world because that was, it's indescribable,
Mhm.
and maybe hard for people to understand. But when you see suddenly your face in someone else's face, it's just indescribable.
Mhm.
So that was an incredible gift, and I've visited them all quite a few times, and on both sides, and it's been wonderful.
Oh, that's really
I
neat.
would I still wish I knew more about my father, and I know I've kind of let go of that
Mhm.
longing because I know after what I've learned about my mother by knowing her six children, I
Mhm.
realized that you never really did learn that much.
Mhm.
You will never really know who that person was and why they did what they did, but just knowing a little bit, knowing the genealogy and seeing the photos is enough.
Mhm.
It's enough.
Right. It brought some closure or
Yeah,
fulfillment or
yeah, yeah.
satisfaction.
Fulfillment, I think, is probably the best word for it. That's a good word for it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, I would certainly like more, but I know that's not likely to happen.
Mhm. Right. Right. I wonder if there's something I mean, I was going to make a generalization about older generations and people feeling excited to connect with people, but with younger
Go ahead.
relatives. But now I'm realizing that sometimes, but I feel like as many people report rejections from older people as well. So
Yeah, that's true. I've had I really haven't had much rejection. The brother that I mentioned, who
right.
is a few years older than I am, um, and
Mm,
she didn't exactly reject me. I called her. She would have been my father's half sister, and
hmm.
she was nice enough. I spoke to her on the phone for maybe an hour, and she sends me Christmas cards. But she really didn't understand my needs. She was very puzzled by my need to
Right.
know. Couldn't quite get why I wanted to know, which is not uncommon. I suppose my brother feels that way too.
Right.
It doesn't have any importance to them because they're not missing anything.
Right. They don't get it.
Yeah, they don't get it.
They don't get it.
Lots of people don't get it.
That's so true. And how did you get from that story, from that experience,
Mhm.
to your project, Severance Magazine?
Ah, um, because I have an enormous tendency to jump into things without thinking about them.
Know that
I
feeling.
don't know if that. Yeah, I was gonna say you may be familiar with the podcast, but
Mm-hmm.
when I found out about all this, for me, that was, I think it was in 2015, and so before I had the chance to, make all my discoveries and figure things out, I was, like everyone else, blindsided and confused and didn't know where to turn. And I realized there's just not a lot of information out there for people. There was one group at the time, and that was pretty much it. There were no podcasts that I'm aware of. I don't believe
Mm-hmm.
there were any podcasts. There was not a lot of anything, and I just realized there was a pretty clear need for information, and somehow decided that I needed to be the person to jump in and
Mm-hmm.
try and fulfill that gap. And at first I thought, well, maybe I'll start a blog or something. And because what I do for work is start magazines, pretty quickly it escalated into, oh, well, I'll start a magazine.
That's so
And I
funny
kind
because
of
that was
like
going to
that.
be one of my questions was like, do you come from the publishing world? Do you
Yes,
know
yeah,
about editorial?
yeah, it's my
Okay.
job. It's my day
Okay.
job.
All right. All right.
Um, which is also what keeps me from developing it further than I'd like to right now because I do have a day job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
I hear
but
you.
yeah, it just, I kind of thought, okay, well, I'll just start a magazine, and I did. And
Mm-hmm.
that was a couple of years later. That was a few years after, and at that time there were still no podcasts. There was still no organizations or research, except that one sort of infamous group.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought, it was obvious that when people initially learn about their NP experience, they need both information and support. And over time, there were more support groups. But I thought something more was needed because support groups really are not terribly information based. They're just sort of,
Mm-hmm.
I hear you, I feel you, which is great and important, but it's not everything. Um, so I wanted to create Severance to be sort of a half magazine where there could be practical information and a half community with a platform for people to share their stories. I know that in the adoption world, people always talk over adoptees or around them or for them, and they don't. I mean, it's improving, but they don't often have the chance to tell their own narrative. And I think the same thing would be happening with MPEs. So I wanted a place for people to be able to do that. And I also noticed in some of the groups, there are people who wish to sort of be spokespersons for MPEs, and
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of a pet peeve of mine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there really is no monolithic universal experience of this. We all perceive it differently. There's no sort of guidepost that's going to work for everyone. So I
Right.
wanted Severance to be a place where I could speak to experts, not just kind of chime in and say, this is my advice, my opinion, because I don't think that sort of advice is useful. It's useful when it's someone like you who has a clinical, who has pertinent degrees, but for others, not so much. Certain degrees of
Even, I
practice.
mean, even so, I don't like I try not to generalize too. Yeah, there's certain things that are common and then everything else is different and you have to take them both into consideration.
Yeah, but you can at least bring an education and a experience of practice to certain situations that most people can't. And many of those people who can't do. And that's unfortunate, I think. I don't think it serves our groups well. So that's why I started it. I think, as you know, because of what you do, stories are really important. I think they're powerful, and I think telling them is powerful, and listening to them is powerful. And I'm sure you've experienced that. I'm sure you hear it back from the people that you talk to. So that was a really important reason. And the other reason was, at that time, it's a little different now, but at that time when I started Severance, all the different types of MPEs were separated in their own groups. You know, adoptees had their groups, and MPEs did, and DC people. And I don't think there was any place where they intersected. And I wanted to bring them together because I think there's really so much that we share, and that maybe together we can create better awareness. Certainly NPEs have a lot to learn from adoptees, for example. And so I thought that was important.
Yeah, that's wonderful. This season, for me, this podcast season, I feel more determined than ever to bring all those pieces together. And the more I learn, the more important that seems to be, that everybody is, each piece fits into the puzzle or the wheel, whatever analogy you want to use. But it's really important to know and understand each group and where each group is coming from, and the differences and the similarities. And it's interesting.
It is interesting, and,
you know,
because there are some differences, you know, but there are a lot of similarities. And I think we are, not to overuse a cliche, but we are stronger together in those greater numbers, just as so many people are working for, you know, like fertility fraud, even though it's not their own particular issue. I think it helps.
Right. Oh, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're doing, like, I know you interviewed Gabrielle Glazer. That's great. She's amazing.
She's amazing. That book's amazing. American Baby, right? Yeah. That book is amazing. So I'm trying to bring in some people from everywhere this particular season. So I'm glad you sort of feel validated by your saying that for Severance Magazine that felt good. And I can say, for me as an NPE, figuring it all out a few years ago, that Severance Magazine is a great, I was just trying to think of how to describe what it is, because sure, it's a website and it's a magazine, but it's kind of a hub. It's kind of this place where it's like I don't know, it's kind of, and I mean this with like so much love and respect. It's kind of like the general store or something. like everybody goes there.
That's nice.
From all the different worlds, and you see people's names that you recognize. I see people's names I recognize from different areas, or there's like this overlap, and I might know one thing about somebody from one area, but then they've written something or done a Q&A with you that shed something else on them, and then there's all these new people. Like, it's not always people I know.
Yeah, that's nice. It's kind of what I would have hoped would happen, and it goes back to another sort of purpose in the way I started it, in that, and I don't want to get too deep in this, but I know you know that there are certain parts of our community that aren't big on sharing. That was something that was really important to me. It's important to me in my private group too, and in the magazine, is that if there's a resource, I want to hold it up. You know, I don't care where it comes from, but if it's going to help somebody, I want to put it out there. And there are more and more people doing that now. You're doing it. Right to Know is doing it, and I think it really helps. I think it helps a lot. So I like being a hub. That's nice.
Yeah, no, I really think you are. And I think, I don't know, I can't speak for anybody else, but in my mind, it's when people are listing or exploring or trying to, when it comes to resources, you're at the top. Like Severance Magazine, go there. They've got something for everybody. I send it to everybody that contacts me asking for resources or help or information. It's always on my list.
I'm happy to hear that.
As far as plans for 2022 with Severance Magazine, just keep on keeping on. You don't have to have any plans. There's no pressure or expectations for me.
I would like to keep on more than I have. I have lately, unfortunately, not been able to put the time into it that I would like, but I'm hoping that will change soon as I kind of clear away some other projects. Because as I said earlier, I started it without enough foresight into what the reality of creating a magazine was. So I really want to be able to put more time into it. I want to do a lot more articles. There've been a lot of essays recently, but I want to do a lot more articles with more of the experts out there about the various emotional impacts and what we can do about them. So that's the only change. It's just more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Making more connections, and trying to introduce more people to. And the community is growing so fast that it becomes harder and harder to keep up with,
Right.
the books and the podcasts and how it is.
Mm-hmm. I do. I know very well. What you have is wonderful. So as long as it's there, you have such a strong foundation that the rest of it, if you build it, we're all at the mercy of our own pace. Right.
Yes.
So, as long as it's not going anywhere.
I hope not.
As long as it's not going anywhere, I support you. If you're going to take it down, I'll have some things to say, but
that gives me motivation to make sure it's going to be there. Thank you.
Good. So if you're a listener, learning about this for the first time, Severance Magazine, severancemag.com is the place to go. It's just a lovely general store of the internet for us misattributed parental experience people. Yeah, so many things there and different. It's another thing that's great, like a magazine, is it's not just it's not a blog, and it's not just Q&As, and it's not just essays. You've got a little bit of everything, and great resources, links to things for people's specific needs.
Yeah, a lot of resources.
Yeah, really wonderful. So thank you. On behalf of myself, but I don't want to, like we just said, we don't want to speak for other people, but I want to say thank you. Thank you for having it, because nothing else has popped up.
Thanks. Well, I can speak for other people in saying the same back to you, because I have heard from other people how much what you're doing is helping, and also just enjoyable. I hear it a lot. So all that back to you.
Thanks. Well, it's all, I mean, I guess it's a give and take about the community, right? Like I get so much fulfillment from the experience of meeting people and talking with people. Yeah. And so how lovely that they may be getting something from me, but if that keeps the cycle going, yes, we're all better for it. Right.
Yeah. And equally lovely is the way that you approach this in a non-competitive way. I loved seeing you and Lily of NBE Stories, in case anybody doesn't recognize that, the way you did, crossover,
crossover
stuff,
yeah,
and the way you promote each other. I just think it's great. It's just, I would love to see more and more of that in the whole community.
Yeah, me too.
I think a lot of people would say, oh, well, there can only be one podcast, or there's only room for one. And you're both showing that there's lots of room and there's lots of stories, and you lift her up and she lifts you up, and it's terrific.
Yeah, and we've become good friends, which is really cool.
I'm not surprised.
Which is so sort of an unexpected I don't know, nice thing about the this experience. But I actually texted with Lily today because I just got a complaint email.
What?
That I am not more like Lily.
Oh, get out.
Yeah. And this poor listener had just had a wonderful time listening to Lily's podcast, and then felt horrified by my approach. And that's fair. Everybody's different and has their own experience, but this person, it sounds like we're in a very like raw and vulnerable place, and felt comforted by Lily's ritual, the way that her podcast is very sort of predictable upon a sort of formula, and she's so empathetic, and they're not ready for any sort of jokes or laughing, or so maybe they will be one day, but
that just proves why there is room for so many. I mean, I love what both of you do, but I think you're so completely different, as this person pointed out. And I've said this so many times. My grandfather had a saying. He used to say, whenever there's a dispute, he'd say, that's why I invented chocolate vanilla. There are people who need the support aspect, and there are people who need a more lighthearted, entertaining conversation. There's also like Cut Off Jeans talk about lighthearted. They do a lot of playful things.
Yeah.
There's
Jules
definitely
Jackson.
room for both.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like all the different groups. They're also different too. Like mine is mostly I use for information because I'm not a support groupie kind of person, really. It's not my comfort zone to tell people support things. It's just sort of not my nature. But there are plenty that are and plenty that do. And I'm sorry you got that, because that just seems really kind of off base.
Oh, well, thank you for being sorry, but I feel like I'm in a good place to recognize that I am not for everyone. No one is for everyone, and
Nor should
also,
you be.
And also what I felt like especially with Lily is that we're so different on purpose. Like if we were the same, then we would both just be making the same podcast like that. So then you wouldn't need two podcasts. You could just, I don't know,
Right.
So I thought, but
what I love
it was
about
funny.
it though is that you called her, or you immediately went to talk to Lily about it. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Lily,
and kind of wonderful.
Someone's complaining that why can't I be more like Lily? But why can't we all be more like Lily? That's maybe that's a bumper sticker we should make or something. Be like Lily.
Funny.
Yeah, and for anybody wondering who we're talking about, please go over to NPE Stories, the podcast, and listen to Lilywood talk to people about their stories. She's got a great format. Well, this was so lovely, Kate. Thank you so much. Was there anything that you wish I'd had asked you, or you think I should have asked you before we go?
No,
about Severance or your own story?
Not about either of those, but there's one thing I just would like to. Actually, maybe it's something I should talk about off because it's sort of probably not very interesting for anybody else, but might be interesting to us.
Okay.
So no.
Okay, no, I'll stop the recording, and then you may begin to tell me this very boring thing. Cool. Well, thank you so much. If you haven't yet, please go find severancemag.com. Drink in all that information, all the voices, all of the resources available there. Thank you, Kate, editor and founder, for sharing yourself with me today, and for funneling your skills and resources into helping others. So impressed. Kate's story is different not only because she started a magazine, but because she comes from a mystery mother, which is something we don't often hear about here. I don't know if anyone out there has read Mary Karr's memoir called The Liars Club. It's an excellent book. Highly recommend it. But there are some similar themes, and I'm just with Kate today, and then also reading Mary Karr's book, and then in my own experience, I'm just struck by how surprised I am over and over again at my own realization that mothers are actually three-dimensional, complicated people with inner lives and secrets of their own. I wonder if my own kids will have that realization about me one day, or if, like me, they will be reminded of it, or need to be reminded of it again and again. Fingers crossed. I don't know which one I want more, for them to know and see my secrets, or think I'm perfect. I don't know. Anyway, thanks so much for being with me for another week of Everything's Relative. Go do all the things I always ask you to do to show your support. If you have your own story to tell, any questions, corrections, or complaints, hit me up on the socials at Everything's Relative Podcast, or you can send me an email, eve@everythingsrelativepodcast.com. One last time, I am Eve Sturges. This is Everything's Relative Podcast, and I'll be back next week for another episode about DNA discoveries. I can't express my gratitude enough to all of you, so I won't. I won't say thank you. Nope, not again. I'm not going to say it. Goodbye. See ya. Eat your vegetables. Goodbye.
Everything's Relative with Eve Sturges is produced by Eve Sturges and Kaylin Egan and edited by Joy Rumel. Logo designed by Ivy McNally, and music is used with permission from Goodbye the Band. Eve is a licensed psychotherapist, but her podcast episodes are not therapy sessions.